Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 1% Better Recruitment Podcast with your host, Charles Kiriakou. Today, I'm joined by Max. Is it Learmouth? Am I saying that right?
Learmonth, mate. Learmonth.
Learmonth, there we go. I've not been particularly well, so apologies. But yeah, I'm here with Max Learmonth, and yeah, today we're going to talk all things business development. And we just before we click record, we realised in the notes that we actually wrote something saying the industry is fucked. So we'll get to that part. I'm sure it'll be quite an interesting conversation. But Max, thanks so much for coming on, mate. I know the first time we properly met on VC was about last week or a week before or so, but for people that don't necessarily know you, what you do, your journey, etc., give us a bit of an introduction, mate.
Yeah, no, will do, mate. And look, thanks for having me on. You've had some awesome guests on so far. A few people I know pretty well, so in really good company. So look, thank you for having me on. Won't bore everybody with who I am, but I've been in recruitment for 12, 13 years. Started off in a large corporate, and that's where I sort of had the foundation. I was there for sort of 7, 8 years, rose through the ranks, joined a smaller to medium-sized business in Manchester and helped sort of grow that. And then decided that I wanted to set up a business myself with a couple of like-minded people that I'd worked with for sort of 8, 9, 10 years. And in May 2023, set up Forge Talent. We as a business specialize in finance and accounting recruitment across the Northwest.
Nice. Happy days. So, like I said at the start of the podcast, we're going to talk all things business development. And before we click record, I said to Max that I was really, really excited to get into this because it's essentially my whole business is training recruiters on BD. And I always really, really get excited when I have someone come on that's going to talk about business development. Because one thing I've noticed since doing this podcast is that I always finish every episode learning something new about the industry, learning a new technique in business development, etc., or even just refining the skill set that I have for the moment. But the first question we spoke about when we first met, Max, was before we even talk about tools, techniques, strategies, and things like that, what does business development in recruitment actually mean from your perspective?
I think for me, business development is an opportunity to start a relationship with somebody. Like for me, fundamentally, that's what business development is, and it's your opportunity to display credibility. The gurus on LinkedIn will tell you how to do it. In my opinion, that's absolutely not the way. So for me, it's that opportunity to build a relationship, and that has to start with a phone call. Not a scattergun approach, but strategically planning who you're going to call and why.
Love it. There's a lot of people these days that would be against that approach in terms of starting BD with a phone call. I'm not going to say that this is a generational thing, but I obviously work with a variety of different types of recruitment businesses, different types of industries, and I feel like a lot of people these days wouldn't start off with a phone call. They would rather get the call booked in via email, LinkedIn, etc. What's your thoughts on that?
How many emails, LinkedIn messages have you had today that you've ignored?
I was actually going through some of the messages. I mean, my email, for example, I probably won't get as many as you, but I've got so many. I don't reply to any of those. We can generate your leads, or this is our new product. I don't reply to those emails. They just look like they are AI written and spammed to 100 different people.
And I'm the same, right? So if you think about how recruiters now have sort of defaulted to sort of post-COVID and how they're being trained, a lot of it is mass spam a database, mass spam LinkedIn. So if you're doing that, and in my opinion, there's a high percentage of people doing that in the industry, where's the differentiator? How can you build a relationship with somebody if they're not going to return your email or return your email? Because again, let's be honest, like how many of those get ignored? So for me, and it might sound old school, and people might think, oh, Max is an asshole, right? But using the phone is your opportunity to actually have a conversation with somebody. And it's a door opener, where I don't believe that email and email is from a client point of view.
Well, what you just said there, I wholeheartedly agree with, because if you're mass mailing the database, you can get some replies from candidates, but I never used to like mass mailing either candidates or clients. I never really got much response from it. If you're doing a very targeted in-mail to a client saying that, say, for example, if I was a rec to rec and I wanted to recruit for your firm, and I said that I just spoke to Rich, he was on my podcast. He said that you're a great guy, said that you were growing your team, and said that you were looking for X, Y, and Z. This is how I think I could help you. Rich has said to get in touch. Should we organize a call? I think that would have a higher chance of you replying rather than, hey Max, here's three candidates I'm working with that had just that you can look at and go, okay, cool, that's been literally sent to 1,000 other companies.
100%. But again, but how many people are actually doing what you've just described? Because your podcast is called 1% Better. I'm going to assume, and it's wrong to assume, but it's probably 1% of recruiters that are actually really, really strategically using that type of outreach.
Why do you think that is? I think I know why. Why do you think that might be?
Because they're not being trained that way. And it's going back to your earlier point. I think it's really, really easy to be like, look, just spec out a candidate on an email, and if you get a bite, then you can book a meeting, then you can follow up. It's Recruiters have got lazy post COVID, so I think laziness, lack of training, and lack of leadership, in my opinion. I'm probably going to get roasted from people for that comment, but it's true.
Yeah, that was going to be my point. I think it's laziness. And the amount of recruiters I've worked with, right, where I look at their in-mail statistics on LinkedIn and it's like 5%, 10% success rate. And I'm like scratching my head here. And I'm like, right, so you've got a client here. You found out that one of their lead engineers has just left. So you got a backfill lead. It's not been advertised on social media or LinkedIn, etc. Like, what have you done? Oh, I've just like mass spec'd out a candidate I'm working with. Why? Because I don't have time to sit there and make a message. I'm like, have you not just got like a standardized template with all like the little? So I used to have templates and I used to have like gaps in the template, like tons and tons of gaps, and then just spend like 5 minutes just personalizing the email. But I would agree with everything you said, but I think the biggest thing is laziness.
Yeah, it's an easy default, and I do think COVID has been a huge part of that. We had the post COVID boom, right, where you could fling a CV, you could make a placement. Like people that were maybe doing 75, 80 grand in a year were all of a sudden doing 200, and they were like, "Oh, this is amazing." Reality check, like that isn't the way the market has been for the last 12 months. And it's not actually what candidates or clients want, in my opinion. They want that relationship, they want that personal touch. You don't get that from an email, from an in-mail.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. Backtracking a second to what you said there, because when we first spoke, I challenged you, but I agreed with you with what you said because I mentioned to you when we first spoke a couple of weeks back that pretty much 80-90% of the calls I've made in the last 3 months have been warm calls. Podcast has obviously helped. People like happy to talk about that. I've obviously been extremely active on LinkedIn, so people know my name and stuff like that. But my approach has been I would send them a LinkedIn message, but if there's a number, as soon as I hit send, then I call them and I
Yeah,
reference that in my cold call. It's difficult if there's not a number, obviously, but when I was a recruiter, I used to call and then send an email because I don't know, it was just like slightly different. I don't know. But I think if there's a number, regardless whether you send them a message or not, you should definitely just call it straight away to build a relationship. So my question to you then, Max, is, and I think we spoke about this briefly, if you're a recruiter and recruiters are listening to this, there's a number in front of them. How do you approach? What's your sort of approach for a cold call if you're just going to call a client out of the blue?
got to be totally honest with the client. And I will use the permission-based opener. Like again, like loads of people are out there at the minute. Permission-based openers are terrible. Like they work for me, right? And it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's business development, cold calling, however you want to articulate it. It's all about what works for that person. And what works for me is, hi Charles, it's Max here from Forge Talent. This is the cold call. Like, can I just have 30 seconds? If there's a little bit of a pause or a delay, I just go straight into to why I'm calling. It's like, and normally 9 times out of 10, how I will approach it is I take a candidate to market that I'm working with, and this goes back to I suppose, the planning element. Every single call that I am doing is purpose led. There is a reason. It's not just, hi Charles, have you got any jobs, please, with my begging bowl. Like that's not how I would approach it. I'm going to work on a candidate's behalf to try and identify them an opportunity. So that's literally how I will open. And then it's how the conversation flows. Look, if they're not hiring, I'm trying to identify different areas and different opportunities, ultimately a pain point to discuss that. Look, I can be a solution. But I'm trying to understand them as a person. I'm trying to understand the business. I'm trying to understand what they look for when they're hiring, the type of profile that they're going to hire. I always ask the question, what do they like about recruiters and what do they not like about recruiters? Again, because then that's going to lead to how I'm going to communicate with them in the future. And I always ask for a meeting. Like at the end of the day, the worst thing that somebody's going to say to you is, I don't have time. It's like, right, well, have you got time in 2 weeks? No, I just don't
Mm.
want the meeting, Max. Like, can you just do one? It's like, okay, fine. Yeah. At that point, I'll sort of listen. Um, but I'll always ask for the meeting because the worst thing that somebody's going to say is no.
And every no is one step closer to a yes, right?
Well, look, it is right, and again, it's salesy and it's a little bit cheesy when we say that, but ultimately, it is. If I keep knocking on the door, at some point, the internal talent team or the direct advert or the agency that they're currently working with is going to do a misstep because nobody's perfect. I make
Mm.
missteps. Christ, I make them all the time. But we're human, right? I'm just looking for an opportunity.
Mm.
So I'm using that initial phone call as a fact finding exercise, likes, dislikes, business, then how I could potentially help in the future. So that when my second call, if I don't get a meeting, I've got information that I can use.
Mm. Love that. It's so interesting. I want to ask you the question in a minute, and I'm just going to reference a couple of guests that I had on. Because the permission-based opener, for whatever reason, is such a controversial topic on LinkedIn. And I know we spoke about it when we first spoke a few weeks back, that one of the main reasons is because there's so many people on LinkedIn at the moment that record themselves doing cold calls, and it's just everyone's got that same permission-based opener, and it just I think it's kind of got to that position now where you just sound like everybody else. And if you're a recruiter, I teach recruiters this all the time. Think about what everyone else is doing, right? And try and be unique, because a lot of people, unfortunately, don't like recruiters. If you say, I always say to people as well, don't say you're a recruitment consultant in your cold call opener, because that's like it's like a buzzer word in someone's head, or whatever the phrase is, that you hear recruiter and you go, oh, fuck's sake, I've had such a bad experience. I used to run that in a training room and say, what's the first thing you think of if I say school? And like 50% will go, oh, learning, it's fun. The
Yeah,
other half, like me, go, fucking, oh, it's awful.
yeah,
Do
yeah,
you know what I mean? If you say that to
yeah,
most clients, I'd say at least 50% of clients, if you say, what do you think of recruiters? They'll go,
yeah.
oh, ghosted, scum, terrible, etc. But why do you think permission-based openers? Obviously, I've given a bit of an insight to from my experience, but why do you think they're so like controversial in LinkedIn and from people?
I think that a huge part of what you've just mentioned, like, is bang on. By the way, I think that's probably the main reason. I think the other part of it is people see it as subservient. So people see it as though, well, you're begging for permission. It's like, no, no, I'm not begging for permission. I'm saying outright it's a cold call. So if they don't want to listen, there's an out. If they don't say no straight away, I'm going straight into the purpose and the reason of why I called. 9 times out of 10, for me and for everybody that works within Forge Talent,
Mhm.
people take the call. So, and everybody's got their own variation of this. Like, this is a cold call.
Mm,
Everybody's got their own variation of that, and everybody in our business is slightly different. But I think it goes back to what you said, plus the gurus, and I use that term like I am taking the piss. They see it as subservient. Um,
mm,
but I do think like you're talking about, there's people that are recording themselves doing it. Every time somebody gets a cold call, apparently now that's the opener. Going back to our earlier point, not a lot of people cold call. Not a lot of people use the phone. So the people that you see in producing all these videos, they're in a very, very, very small percentage of the people that are
mm.
actually doing it, in my opinion.
Mm. It's a very good point. You've just reminded me of something that happened in my last company. They're probably not going to hear this, and it's not slacking them off, but it was something that pissed me off, to be honest with you. I worked with a rec tech company that done like video interviews and stuff like that, right? And one of their like head of like one of their learning directors or something hosted a free webinar, and I sent it to everyone in the company, and I was just like, look, these guys are really, really good. I would jump onto this webinar. It's all about cold calling. And one of the things was permission-based openers, and the lady basically talked about about the science behind it and why they work. And I'd never really heard of it. I'd seen some people on LinkedIn do it, but I'd never used it. So I was like, this is interesting. This is new. Let's experiment with something new, see if it works. So I came in the next day to the office and said, oh, who watched the webinar? And one of the senior consultants stood up and was just like, what the fuck was that? And I was like, what? And it was like permission-based openers. What the fuck? And I was just like, what? CEO pulled me aside and was just like, next time you want people to watch a webinar, I need you to sense check it first because I'm not having that in my business. And I was like, fucking what? Like, it's for me, my values is like I want to soak in as much knowledge from different perspectives, and then I can sift out the bullshit from the good. And I was like, well, it seems like it works. They've got science to back it up. I've seen other people it's working. Like, why don't we just experiment with it? And obviously, I was full time. I'm not doing what I'm doing now. So I didn't have to make any sales calls.
Yeah.
Got a couple of consultants to try it and they worked. But the fact that the CEO and the senior consultants were like, no, I asked them why. And it was exactly what you just said there, Max. They were like, why are you begging for permission from a client? I, for me,
But
that
that,
whole mindset is just weird.
but it's not begging permission. It's not being subservient. It's right. Everybody says that they're busy, right? Like, so you're giving them a little bit of a window to say, look, now's not the time. Okay, when is?
Mm,
But I get it's just manners. Like in my
mm,
opinion, it's got nothing to do with being subservient. Like if somebody phones me and just rams something down and it's rare and rams
mm.
something down my throat, I'm like, look, I ain't got time
Yeah.
for this. Like, see you later. If somebody phones me and somebody did it yesterday and it's the first cold call I've had in a while, about tech stack, told me it was a cold call, asked if I had a little bit of time. I was like, fill your boots. This is what I do day in, day out, like rattle through. He booked a demo with me for next week, but it was a permission-based opener. So look, I think it's not for everybody. Clearly, you're going to have your own variation of it. Some people are against it. I'm for it. It works for me. It's helped since we launched the business. It's helped with billings. So yeah, I'm going to carry on doing it.
Yeah, love it. Well, something I was going to mention earlier, there's a couple of guests. So Aaron, who was on in October from Add Some Zest, and there's another guy that I actually worked with. He's the first guest from Germany on the podcast. And he had quite an interesting take as well on different openers and what works in the DAC market. His approach is very similar to yours. Uses a loose version of a permission-based opener, but he doesn't ever do any selling on the first call. He says, I leave all my selling to the discovery call. I don't lead with a candidate unless the client says, who have you got? What are you working with? He says in Germany, for example, it's like if I start saying I'm working with this phenomenal candidate, they just shut off. And I was like, cool, I've worked that market. I kind of understand that. Aaron's approach was very similar to yours, but not candidate based as well. It was he understand, and this is what he said about how to be 1% better, is really identify your market's problem and find the solution and take it to market. So he does tech sales recruitment. So he calls his clients and says, look, most companies, he does his permission-based openers and says, if you've got 30 seconds, and he says, most companies in your sector have one of three issues, but, do any of those ring any bells to you? And if the company goes, no, we actually hire all our talent fine, we no issues with retention and stuff, then it will use a Chris Voss label and says, it sounds like it's probably the worst timing in the world and you probably don't need a recruiter. And 9 times out of 10, well, maybe we might need a recruiter, or they'll say, actually, no, you're probably right. And he goes, let's just stay close, etc. But I think those are both quite interesting, and they're kind of a mixture between like new school and old school in respects to still cold call, but they're not even really leading with a candidate or doing any selling in the first instance.
Yeah, I'm looking at. I think for me, the market that I do, right, accounting and finance in the Northwest, the challenge or the pain point, it is candidates. Like
Mm,
it is, like it's identifying A&F talent in the Northwest. Like that is the biggest challenge for businesses in the geography. So for me, I've got to lead with that. And
makes
one of
sense.
the main reasons is around credibility. I've got to
Mm,
show that I'm credible in a very, very short window to try and get that foot in the door for the meeting. So my credibility shot, other than me saying, I've been in recruitment for 13 years, this is all I've done. It's
mm.
let me talk to you about a candidate I'm representing. And this is the reason why I've called you. That's my opportunity for a bit of a snapshot to show credibility.
Yeah, nice. It's so interesting, isn't it? Because every market is so unique in that respect. Some people's market leading with a candidate might not be, I mean, I think it's always going to be relevant, but it might not necessarily be as prevalent for the market you work in, for example. But let me ask you about, you mentioned before about the planning before a cold call. So this is something I go through with consultants and business leaders all the time, that you put together a BD strategy and then you've got a list of people to call. That's great. That's half the battle. But I notice so many recruiters, they just get on the phone, they call a client, and it's like, oh, I've got a candidate, but they don't really do any research, any planning, any preparation. And it goes back to what I think is laziness, because I don't have the time. I have an hour BD sprint. I've got to smash through this list. Bonkers mindset. From your expertise and from your perspective, when you're prepping and planning before you go and smash through your list, what types of things are you specifically doing to do that?
To me, I do it every night. I'm looking at everybody that is in the business. it's similar. For me, it's at the back end of the day when I put my daughter down and she's gone to bed and stuff. Um, and we as a business track everything. Who our competition have placed, who the movers and shakers are, what business is about to go through sort of PE or looking for PE funding, what business is going to go through a sale. We track everything from a perm and contract point of view, individually and collectively, and there's a lot of collaboration. And we're a small team, but there's a lot of collaboration. So every night without fail, I'll take an hour, and I'll be reviewing of basically who's hired what in the last 12 to 18 months. And for me, it's sort of management, finance, and above. I will identify those CEOs, CFOs, FDs that have hired those types of individuals, and they'll be getting a call. I'll be looking at where our competition has placed. I'll be looking at leads. I'll be looking at reference calls. I'll be looking at, again, this one is probably way down the track, but I'll be looking at sort of, are there any, adverts that have been up sort of 60 days ago that have then just like disappeared? It's like, well, I'm going to phone those people back because those adverts might not have been filled. If they are still recruiting, they might hire an interim. So for me, it's about identifying the buckets, and like there's some core buckets that we all look at every single night, and then that goes into the planning for the following day. Everybody uses our CRM and system. I still like having it in my notepad. So for me, I like writing it all down, and it's like I've got to actually physically sort of check it off. But it's the buckets of business development. It's not just a list here, let's call through. It goes back to everything that we've spoken about identifying why. And it can also be, you met a candidate yesterday who is within fintech, relocating to Manchester. Well, it would be very silly of me, if that's been their background, to not contact the CEOs, CFOs within fintech businesses across Manchester and talk about that candidate's profile. So not to labour the point, but there's lots of different things that we can do, and it's all around the core buckets of planning and preparation.
Yeah, all right, that's there's so much there that I could unpack, but it's so good to hear because, like I said, there's so many people that they don't do that level of preparation. My biggest pet peeve these days, and I don't know if you will agree, is people that just attack job board leads, and that's the only level of research they do. Is, hey Max, I see you're hiring for X. How you getting on? It's just like, mate, everyone's fucking doing that. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, no, absolutely, mate. And I suppose this is my own fault. I did a LinkedIn post a little bit earlier about us hiring. While we've been on this call, I've had 12 emails, right?
Classic.
And I've only had 2 cold calls. I'll be calling those 2 people back because they called me. The emails, they're probably not going to get responded to.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. So you mentioned there about relationship building. So when I started my career, I started off in nursing recruitment, not the most technical market in the world, but you had to be very good at relationship building because it was fast-paced contract. If you pissed a nurse off, they could easily just go and work with another agency. I had nurses would send me text messages saying, Max from this company is offering me £1 an hour extra. I want to stay with you, etc. So you had to be really good at relationship building. And when I got into permanent recruitment, it's everything because it's like a long sales cycle, right? So you have to be really good at it. There's been a few people that have said, sure, there are techniques to help people build relationships, but there are some people that are naturally better at building relationships. Don't necessarily know if I agree with that per se, but let's start with this. What do you think makes, or actually, no, let me rephrase that. How do you go about building really good relationships with candidates and clients then? You tell us.
So clearly we've spoke about the cold call, right? So ignore that for now. It starts with a meeting. I think I'm a really good listener. And I ask a ton of questions, but they're questions about the individual. So I suppose, how do I build relationships? I listen to how people want to be communicated with, to what they're actually looking for, to what they like about a recruiter, to what they don't like about a recruiter, and I behave in that way. If I commit to doing something, I do it. And whether that's, I'll update you in a week, I'll update you in 2 weeks, this is what I'm going to do on your behalf. So it's, for me, that meeting is about displaying credibility, but this time the credibility is through listening. And then it's about what I do with the follow up, and whether that follow up is then on a call or it's on a Teams or it's another coffee in 2, 3 months down the line. I don't go on to, or I don't attend any meeting expecting Charles to say, Max, here's a finance director job, here's an FC job. Can you work it for us?
Mm.
If that happens, by the way, awesome.
Mm.
But that's just not the reality. So it I've got to it's baby steps, right? The call is to get the foot in the door. The meeting is to listen. It's to display credibility. It's then all about the follow up as well.
Mm. I want to go on and talk about the follow up in a moment, but what you've just said there, it rings so true to me. And this is something I go through with people when I do like rapport building training. Because a lot of my NLP was about advanced levels of rapport. And there's some like really weird psychological things that I spoke to a client about this yesterday about like just literally mirroring and matching someone's facial expressions that can help elevate the level of rapport and things like that. But it just reminds me that I've worked for some people before where you'll be sat in a meeting talking about what's going on, and you could see them thinking about what they're going to respond with, but they're not listening. And I always say to people that one of the biggest communication issues we have in today's society is loads of people will listen to respond rather than listen to understand. And what you've just said there in terms of building a relationship with someone and just showing that credibility, if you're listening to understand someone and asking really good questions, both professional questions and personal questions as well, I think that's just such a solid tip for people that are looking to up their relationship building game.
I think unfortunately, lots of people now, they whether they do a meeting or whether they're on a phone call, all they're thinking about is what's in it for me, and all they're thinking about is I need to make a placement. Like
Mm,
that's all they're thinking about. They're not, and that's really really short term. They're not thinking about medium and long term.
mm,
Um, and and by the way, like candidates and clients for me, they're all customers. So everybody is treated the same, and I think people are sort of using candidates for like fact finding information, like fact finding leads, opportunities.
mhm,
All they're thinking about is what's in it for me. They're not thinking about how can I actually help this person find a job. And then
mhm,
when they're meeting with a client, like some of them do, it's all they're thinking about is making the placement. It's not about, well, is this person actually going to be right for the business? And that's where the listening bit comes into it. I do think that comes with time, though. I think
yeah.
back to starting in recruitment, going back in 2011, 2012.
Mm,
Was I the best listener? Probably not.
mm.
That's something that has evolved, but I think it's a soft skill now that is massively important.
Mm. Well, that was one of the things actually that my old boss at Projectors, his wife was like she worked part time. She's like the operations and like learning development director. And on my first day, she went through like my disc profile and a few of the other like personality questionnaires that I had to do. And she said that was quite high on EQ. Didn't know what the fuck that meant at the time. And she was talking about like soft skills and like listening skills and stuff. I came from a recruitment background where we didn't do training, we didn't understand any of this type of stuff. It was just book as many shifts as you can and earn a load of cash, right? Like a lot of recruitment firms, unfortunately. But you mentioned there about like the soft skill, and I think that listening is probably, I'd say, the two most important skills in recruitment is the level of questions that you ask and your listening skills. Because I say this to people all the time, recruitment, all it is asking questions. You open a cold call, you ask a question, you close a deal, you're asking questions to see if they're going to accept the role, you're agreeing terms. Everything in this job is just a series of questions. So if you can master those two things, in my opinion, those are the two biggest like soft skills I'd say that you can learn.
Yeah, look, I massively agree, mate. I think it's not something that's spoken about enough. It's not something that, in my sort of experience in recruitment, is talked about, is trained. Um, People are like, businesses are, there's a list, go and get some jobs on, fill the jobs. And there's definitely been an evolution of learning and development and training in recruitment, which I think is great. I think it's only going to get better
Hmm.
again over the next sort of 3, 4, 5 years. With lots of independent people like yourself that are now rolling out training for businesses. So I think it's only going to get better, but it's something that's going to have to continue to evolve.
Yeah, no, it definitely will. And this is what I said, right? In my last company, we had training that had been used by their old firms for many, many years. And my whole methodology and my whole philosophy with what I do now is go out there and speak to as many different people and get as much information and as many tools and techniques. And then I just sift through. Like I'll have some people on the podcast and I'll go, that's an interesting technique. Don't think that would work for me. I don't think that would work for a lot of people, but it's interesting. I now know that. It's like a little skill
Yeah.
that I've got. But I always believe that you should soak in as much knowledge from everyone as possible to elevate your game, because there, like I said, there will be things that you're going to learn that just might not work for you, but there might be
Yeah.
something. And look, in 10 years time, when the next evolution of self-employed coaches come out, I'm going to look at LinkedIn and go, fucking hell, that's awesome. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely, mate.
So we've talked a lot about your cold call openers. Your discovery call sounds very just relationship orientated, asking the questions about what they like, what they don't like about recruiters and stuff like that. um I want to ask you, if somebody's listening or watching this podcast now and they're tasked with building a new market, and they've got to go out there and they've got to put together a strategy to go and open up a new, or build a new desk, or they're starting a new job, whatever it is, how would you go about doing that? If you had to then build a new market within your business now, what would be your process to go around doing that?
So, mate, look, when we launched Force Talent, I hadn't been on the tools since 2017, so I had to go out there and build a new market. Like I had to. Clearly, I had a load of experience behind me
Mm,
to help me do that. And I don't think it's any different. I think it's twofold. I think the candidates that you meet and the candidates that you represent are so important. Rich Evans, obviously, who you know, talks about what's your tangible asset in sales. Like, what is your tangible asset? That's your candidate. So
mm,
you've for me, you've got to meet as many candidates as possible. One, because they are eyes and ears in the market, and if you get on with them really well, like they do tell you things. Okay, I'd be lying
mm,
if I said that they don't. You only action it if it's okay with them,
mm.
in my opinion. Again, I ask permission. Call me subservient. Um, but that they're the individuals that I'm going to be sort of taking to market. So I need to have a pool of talent that I'm speaking to constantly, and I'm being proactive on their behalf. Um, the other thing, it is cold calling. It's map out your market, identify who the decision makers are, identify who the hiring managers are of the businesses that you want to try and break into, the businesses that your candidates have worked for previously that have left, and be proactive. I think the big thing I would say to anybody is don't scroll on LinkedIn and send mass emails, mass messages. If you're being tasked with starting a new desk, be proactive. Um,
Mm.
and you've got to get out there and you've got to build your name, and you cannot do that hiding behind the email and email.
I couldn't agree with you more, mate. I couldn't agree with you more. It reminds me when I had to build out the surgical medtech sales desk, and I was known as a bit of a telephone terrorist. I would just call anyone and just everyone, and I always wanted to be top of the call stats, because I knew that was the one thing that was in my control. I could beat everyone at being on the phone more. And I remember one time I was just trying to basically speak to some candidates, see who I could take to market, and I called this guy, a guy called Johan. And I showed my manager and I was like, I'm just going to give this guy a call. I think he'd be decent. And he was like, he's the business development director. And I went, hmm? Looked at his profile. The geezer answered the phone. I was like, yo, and hi, it's Charles Kiriakou here. How's it going? I was like, oh, fuck me. I haven't looked at his fucking profile. I've obviously got an old CV where it said he was a sales rep. He's now a
Yeah,
business development director. But this is where a lot of recruiters, you can harness this skill. I had to, from what I did before, of just flipping on the spot and then improvising. Had his profile up on my screen. I was just like, right, reason why I'm giving you a call. You work for this business. I want to work with you, blah, 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 done my intro, whatever. 2 years later, he turned out to be a client of mine. And it goes back to what you just said. How many people were actually cold calling the guy? His business development director for one of the biggest endoscopy and surgical urology companies in the world. How many people were actually trying to call the guy? Why were they trying to call him? My whole sole purpose was, I'm going to just build a relationship with you. I'm going to ask you some questions about who you are, what trade shows you're going to. I saw him at 3, 4 different other trade shows, and every single time he saw me, high five me, how's it going? I've met this guy. This goes back to what you said about the follow ups every single time. And then the last time I saw him, I think it was up in Liverpool at the Echo Arena. He pulled out his phone and said, right, come here, what's your email? He sent an email to every single person in the talent acquisition team, the director, the VP, all the talent acquisition partners, and said, I've met this guy multiple times. He's at every single trade show. He needs to be on the PSL. And he got me on the PSL. And that was literally off the back of a random cold call I did in 2016. And we eventually got on the PSL, I think, in 2018.
yeah. It's mate, that's a sort of a senior candidate flip, right? Going back to my point around candidates and clients being your customer. If you're dealing with somebody, again, put it back to me, like finance manager, finance controller, finance director level, about their search, and you're listening to everything that they're talking about on a personal search, you can then talk to them about what they do within their business for recruitment, because you've been asking them about what they like and what they don't like about recruiters. So it's the most powerful asset in recruitment is your candidate. It's how you treat your candidate that is then going to be the differentiator for how much you perform, how much you grow with the business, how big a brand your name has, and how good your reputation is.
You mentioned quite a few times as well that you meet every single candidate, you meet every single client. I love that. That's a philosophy that my old boss Tim installed in all of us, and said that whenever you speak to clients, mention that you're not allowed to submit a candidate until you've met them. And I thought that was a really, really good thing to do. Flipping it to you though, why is that something that you and everyone in your business does? Because not everyone does that, unfortunately.
It goes back to I want as a business to be known as we are relationship driven. We're not about transactions. And we're really, really credible. How can I genuinely charge a client a fee if I've sent in a short list of 4 or 5 people that I've not met? Like that just doesn't sit right with me in any way, shape, or form. Like that is back of a fag packet recruitment. Like it really, really is.
Back of a fag packet. I love that.
I'm not a smoker, by the way, but it is like it's not doing recruitment properly, in my opinion. And again, there'll be lots of people that listen to this and they'll think he's full of shit. He doesn't know what he's talking about, and there'll be lots of people that have been successful doing it one way. But how can I genuinely charge somebody a fee, and I don't charge people 15%, it's significantly more, if I have not met the candidate? If I'm talking about as well that I've got a real good understanding of what a client is looking for, right? And personality fit is just as important as skill set at certain levels in recruitment. But if I don't know what this person's personality is like, and if they're going to fit within the business, if they're going to gel with the line manager, if they're going to gel with the team that they're going to look after, well, I don't know that from an email. It's impossible.
Mate,
So,
honestly, you've
so
nailed it on the head there. Like when you're doing a job qualification, right? So many people just focus just on skills. Like, have they got this qualification? Have they got X amount of years? But if you're hiring someone, you need to make sure that they're a good fit for the team as well. I've interviewed people when I was a billing manager. I've interviewed people. You look on their CV, they've done life science recruitment for 3-4 years. They've got great billings. You meet them and you go, no, you're not going to fit in with our culture. So if you're not meeting candidates and not meeting clients, like you said, I'm going to have to steal that, Max, the back of a fab packet recruitment. It's just, that's a brilliant saying. I love it.
you can have it, mate. There you go. That's for free.
Love it. Well, that's actually probably a really good segue, because we said it before we clicked record, like how we're going to get this involved about the industry being fucked, right? Obviously, I went to
It does sound like something I would say. So
yeah. Well, as you know, I went to the Recruitment Agency Expo in Birmingham, October, because this will probably come out in December or something like that. And I just walked around and just basically asked everyone the question I finished the show with: how do we get 1% better? And as I mentioned to you, I'm very driven and passionate about shifting the perception of the recruitment industry. I'm so proud. I still feel like I'm a recruiter, and I think it's given me so much in life. And I wouldn't be able to take my business and the podcast where it is now without the skills I've learned from recruitment. I'm very, very proud of that. But the industry is flawed in many ways. And I think it goes back to a lot of what you've just said there about a lot of businesses being super transactional, realizing that we are a people business and people don't think of people, it's profit over people. The first guest I had on, Patrick, said something very similar to what you said at the start about how too many recruitment businesses are too focused on doing the deal, but actually not focused on finding the right people, working with the right businesses, etc. We could probably talk for hours about why it's flawed and what the issues are and how to fix it. But I guess you're going to have a slightly different perspective to me, I guess. Why do you think it is messed up, flawed, fucked?
it's become like so transactional. Like it really, really has. People that have been in the industry for a long time will say it's always been this way. In my opinion, and that's all it is. It's not. It is getting so much worse. People are being falsely represented. by businesses. People are having their CV sent without consent. It's about how quickly you can make a fee, bang something on boarded, get it invoiced, speak to Charles 1 minute and then never speak to Charles again. Like for me, that is a large way around. Sorry, for me, that is the way people are conducting themselves.
Mm.
Um, it's spamming databases, which we've spoken about already. There's no actual true like customer service or customer satisfaction. So I think that's the problem. I think that's happening because of shitty leadership,
Mm.
shitty learning and development, and the barrier to entry from a new recruiter point of view, but also like leadership being so low.
Mm.
So I think for those three things, are creating a lot of shitty recruiters who don't really have morals or ethics.
That's one of the biggest issues. I work for a business that literally didn't have a set of company values. I was completely shocked at why I even started working with a business that didn't even have a set of values. How can you lead a bunch of recruiters when you don't have a set of values that you are working towards? If you don't know what good and bad behavior looks like, and then you've got people that are, and granted, this was in a really, really good market, but you've got people that are doing 50, 60 grand months, but and I can't say this on the podcast, some of the stuff that was going on in the office and some of the stuff that was going in the back office. And I'm like, why the fuck are we not getting rid of these people? It's because we didn't have a set of values. We didn't understand what good and bad behaviors were. So it's so flawed in that respect. And what you mentioned there, it makes me laugh actually, because I'm so proud of recruitment and being a recruiter at heart. My friends kind of take the mix sometimes because one of the guy that was my best man showed me his phone the other day. His LinkedIn is just like scrolling, endless scrolls of recruiters mass mailing him for jobs that aren't even to do what he does. And I had another friend that had been out of work for 6 months or so. COVID was a bit difficult for him. And he was like, this recruiter put me up for an interview, had the interview, never spoke to the recruiter ever again. This one, same, this one, same, this one, same. And I'm just sat there and I'm just like, bro, that's not all recruiters, but unfortunately it's embarrassing, but there's just a lot of recruiters that do that. And I just look at that and it just makes me feel fucking sick to my stomach, to be honest.
Mate, you put 10 people in a room that have worked with a recruiter, and one of them will probably say something positive. Because the market is so saturated, and for all the reasons that I've mentioned, it's just become so transactional. And
Mm,
unfortunately, the people that are promoting the transactional led recruitment, they just don't give a shit. Like they don't.
mm,
I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel, by the way, like at all. Like recruitment is recruitment. Um,
mm.
I'm just trying to do it with a relationship led approach.
Yeah. And you you can make really good money in recruitment and still be a good person and
Yeah,
still be service led. You can still do the occasional mass mail to the database for candidates if you've got a hot job on. There's no harm in doing that occasionally. But if that's all that you're doing and you're doing everything else that we just spoke about, it can really, really damage your brand. And I spoke about something on LinkedIn today about ghosting, and it's so alarming, Max. The amount of times I've met companies, right? And I don't care. I've been in sales for over 10 years, right? It's like water off of a duck's back if I get ignored or whatever, right? But I just think to myself in my head, if I met you and I sent you a proposal and said, like, look, here's the proposal. If you've got any issues, any questions, come back to me. But look, we'll book in some time to speak in 2 weeks. And you go, sound, thanks very much, Charles. Let's speak in 2 weeks. And then you ghost me. I just think in the back of my head, if you're a leader of a recruitment business and you're ghosting someone off the back of that, don't get angry that your recruiters are ghosting candidates and your reputation's going down the fucking sinkhole.
yeah, but they're probably not getting angry about it. Like at the end of the day, they're like, oh, they're making fees, so like that's probably what they're thinking about. I could be wrong. I don't know clearly everybody in recruitment. And there
Mm,
are some really, really good people in recruitment, and there are some
mm,
really, really good business leaders, owners that I respect massively.
mm.
Some of them you've got on your pod, um, but unfortunately, there was a lot of shady shit going on.
Mm. Something you mentioned, and Leisha and I spent 20 minutes on the podcast talking about the barrier to entry in recruitment. My first ever training academy when I was the L&D manager at my last firm, it's fucking hilarious, mate. Like two of them turned out to be really, really good. The other two had no place of being in the recruitment industry at all. I just had no idea. I got in a row with the internal recruiter. I was like, why the fuck have we hired this person? It's just absolutely dreadful.
Yeah.
But there is no entry for no barrier for entry for recruitment. I mean, I failed school miserably. I didn't have any qualifications, didn't have any work experience. If you looked at my CV before my first job in recruitment, I think the longest employment I had was 3 months. It was dreadful, right? But I had other things that made me be successful in recruitment. What what do you think if we could somehow map out and say this is the entry for recruitment, right? I still don't believe you need to have a degree to get into
Yeah,
recruitment.
no, I don't. Yeah, I completely agree with that. You don't.
But what do you think are the key things that businesses are missing out on when they're hiring trainee? Like we'll talk about just trainee consultants or whatever. What are those things that people should be looking at?
Um, I think life experience is pretty important.
Mhm.
I do. I think what the motivation is to get into recruitment, what the appetite and willingness to learn is. You can get most of this from an interview. You
Mm,
can. You don't need to be degree educated. Christ, far from it. Um, I, I don't know what the right answer to that is, mate. If I'm being perfectly honest, I'd be
mm,
lying to you if I said that I did. But there needs to be something about somebody's entry into recruitment. Maybe it's an accredited L&D program that they have to go through before
mm.
they're sort of customer facing. Maybe it's something along those lines. Um, but at the minute, anybody can join a recruitment business, can do it really badly and derail candidates and clients.
Yeah. I actually mentioned that to Hisham at the Recruitment Agency Expo in March, and he asked me about that and was like, why do you think the barrier for entry is so low? And I said, I don't know if there are accreditations that you can do, but I think that would be a really good idea if we did have something like that. Doesn't necessarily need to be overly hard or difficult, but more on the lines of this is the etiquette for a recruiter. These are the principles of being a recruiter. And I think if we had something like that, it would just elevate the industry. Imagine if every trainee consultant fresh out of school that's like, right, recruitment, I can earn some good money. And they go through this like 1 week course or like a couple of days or something. And it's like, cool, I understand what the behaviors are to succeed, what the etiquette is, all that type of stuff. I just think that I don't know how you would actually implement that, to be honest with you, but I think that would just make such a difference for the industry, to be honest.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's not. I don't think it's going to happen in our lifetime, mate. If we're honest, but I do think something along those lines, like that would be awesome.
Yeah, and it's really interesting as well because my target business size that I work with is like anything from like 1 to 20 heads. Anything bigger than that, I can work with them, but my specialty is working with startups, small to medium sized businesses. And one of the number one sort of objections I get from a business leader is, oh, we're too small to have like a trainer or coach come in. And one of my first ever clients was literally like five people, two business owners, three consultants, and I just used to come in once a week and just sit down and just go through their business and just upskill them on bits and bobs. It it blows my mind that people start a recruitment business, they've had no training themselves, and they just want to hire a bunch of, let's call them kids, right? Because that's what I was when I started in recruitment. Don't train them and do exactly what you just said there. Here's a list of people, go and get some jobs on.
Mate, that is again, like in my opinion, that's how nine out of 10 people are doing it. And you've got people that then don't last in the industry very long, and if they do, they're not doing it particularly well.
Mm, messed up, mate. Messed up. Well, I'm sure we could talk a lot about that, and hopefully within our lifetime we'll see a bit of a difference on that. But listen, thank you very much for coming on. It's been really, really enjoyable. The last question that I ask every guest is, following today's episode, how can people get 1% better in recruitment?
Very good question, mate. Keep it really simple because I could talk about a lot. Do what you say you will. If you commit to somebody that you're going to phone them back, you're going to provide feedback, um, just do it. Like at the end of the day, we're there to provide a service. Provide that service the best you can.
Solid. Congruency. That was my NLP coach's favorite word. Just be congruent. Do what you say you're going to do. I love it.
Absolutely, mate.
Awesome. Cool. All right, Max. Well, look, again, thank you very much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. For people that don't already follow you on LinkedIn, I highly recommend it because the stuff that you post is pretty pretty bloody awesome, to be fair. But yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. Like, subscribe to the video, follow us on Spotify and YouTube. I'm hopefully coming to Apple Podcasts soon as well, but I'm having an absolute mare with it. And if people haven't subscribed to the newsletter, subscribe to the newsletter as well. Post that every single month with a bit of a synopsis on every episode, some quotes, and the answer to the final questions. But thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, mate.